Marcus Williams stepped out of his sleek black car and adjusted his tie as he looked at the car dealership building in front of him. The morning sun reflected softly off the glass windows, making the dealership look even more expensive and polished. He had been looking forward to this visit for weeks. Today, he planned to check on a specific luxury car model he had researched for months. It was a big step, and he wanted everything to go smoothly. He had prepared himself for a serious discussion with the staff, not knowing that this ordinary day would turn into something unforgettable. Marcus walked confidently toward the entrance, his polished shoes making quiet sounds on the clean pavement. As he entered, the smell of new leather and polished metal greeted him. He noticed the cars lined up in perfect rows, each shining under the bright lights. The place was quiet, with only a few customers already browsing. The staff moved around with clipped efficiency, but their eyes flicked toward him almost immediately. Marcus noticed it but didn't let it bother him. He was used to being in spaces where people judged him too quickly, but he had learned that calm confidence could change a room faster than anger ever could. Greg, the dealership manager, was standing near the front desk, talking to a sales assistant. He was a middle-aged man with a neatly trimmed beard and a sharp suit that looked like it cost more than the cars he sold. Greg had seen plenty of customers come and go, but something about Marcus made him uneasy. He wasn't sure why, but the manager's instincts colored by years of assumption started to speak louder than his reason. He frowned slightly and watched Marcus approach the desk. "Good morning," Marcus said, his voice polite and steady. "I am here to see the new models you have for the X series. I am interested in the latest features and pricing." Greg looked at him more closely now. Marcus was dressed well, no doubt, but Greg's first thoughts were biased. "Do you have an appointment?" he asked sharply, his tone more commanding than curious. "This is a busy dealership, and we have a lot of clients today." Marcus nodded politely. "No, I do not have an appointment, but I have done my research, and I would like to speak with someone about purchasing a vehicle. I hope that's possible." Greg's expression tightened. There was something in Marcus's calm confidence that irritated him. Perhaps it was the assumption that Marcus could be a troublemaker or someone who didn't belong in the space. He glanced at the staff around him, as if silently seeking approval for what he was about to do. The employees looked uncomfortable, sensing that Greg might be crossing a line. "I'm sorry," Greg said, his voice firm now. "But I don't think you should be here right now. Maybe you should come back later, or schedule an appointment." Marcus's eyes remained steady. He could have raised his voice, but he didn't. He had learned long ago that reacting with anger only gave power to those who judged him unfairly. Instead, he smiled slightly and said, "I understand your concern, but I promise I am here with serious intentions. I am ready to discuss a purchase today if that is acceptable." Greg's frown deepened. He waved his hand toward the door. "No, it's not acceptable. I don't want any confusion. You should leave." The words felt like a punch, even though they were spoken with a fake sense of authority. Marcus's hands were relaxed at his sides, but inside, he felt a quiet frustration. He had seen this before, the subtle way some people assumed things about him because of the color of his skin or the way he looked. Today, he had expected a polite conversation, not this judgment. Still, he didn't let it show. He took a slow breath, keeping his voice calm and even. "I'm just here to look at the cars and discuss options," he said. "I haven't done anything wrong, and I am more than willing to follow your rules. Please, let's talk." Greg shook his head, now clearly irritated. He took a step closer to Marcus, lowering his voice slightly so that the sales assistants could hear the authority in it. "I said you need to leave. This dealership does not serve people who show up without an appointment. I don't know who you think you are, but this is my floor, and I make the rules." Marcus's jaw tightened slightly, but his face remained calm. He could feel the eyes of the staff and a few nearby customers watching. Some of them looked uncomfortable. Others seemed shocked at the manager's bluntness. Marcus realized this was no longer just about buying a car, it was about respect. And he had learned that patience and calmness often speak louder than anger. "I am happy to wait," Marcus said, keeping his tone soft but firm. "I can speak to the sales representative and discuss the purchase at a time that is convenient. I am serious about this, and I respect your position as the manager." Greg stared at him, his face a mix of disbelief and irritation. He couldn't understand why Marcus wasn't backing down. The manager had expected someone to leave quietly or argue in anger, giving him control over the situation. Instead, Marcus stood there, polite but unshakable, silently challenging Greg's assumptions. The tension in the room increased. Some of the staff exchanged glances. One of the younger sales assistants whispered quietly to another, "I think he's serious. He doesn't seem like the usual customer who comes here and leaves after looking around." Greg didn't hear the whispers. He was focused only on his perception, convinced that Marcus did not belong there. He straightened his shoulders, took a step closer, and repeated his demand. "I don't care who you are. You need to leave now. Security will escort you out if necessary." Marcus finally moved slightly, pulling out his briefcase and opening it calmly. He pulled out a folder and laid it on the desk. Inside were documents, neatly organized, showing his research, his plans, and, most importantly, his identity. He looked at Greg and smiled politely. "I hope this clears up any confusion. I am Marcus Williams, and I am here as a serious buyer today." Greg glanced briefly at the documents but didn't focus. He waved dismissively, still not fully seeing Marcus's importance. "I don't care about your papers. You should leave." The scene grew more uncomfortable. Customers were now staring, and a few whispered among themselves. Some staff members subtly moved closer to Marcus, sensing the tension and beginning to question the manager's judgment. Marcus, aware of the eyes on him, kept his posture straight, his voice calm, and his expression composed. He understood that reacting with anger would only escalate the situation, but he also knew he could not back down from disrespect. This moment captured the quiet struggle Marcus often faced in professional spaces. He was polite, educated, and well prepared, yet assumptions and bias were obstacles he had to navigate. Still, he had faced worse situations before, and his confidence was built on years of proving himself through work, calm decisions, and silent strength. Greg, growing increasingly uncomfortable, looked around, seeing the staff's silent judgment. He realized that Marcus was not the typical visitor he assumed him to be, but pride and fear made it difficult for him to step back. He had believed he controlled the floor, that he could assert authority without question. Now, he was starting to feel the first stirrings of doubt. Marcus's eyes remained on the manager, calm and steady. He wasn't looking to humiliate him, but he wanted the truth to be recognized. Respect cannot be assumed, it must be given. He had handled situations like this before, and he knew that patience and composure often led to results that anger and confrontation never could. The tension was thick, the air charged with the unspoken truths of assumptions, prejudice, and authority. Marcus knew that one way or another, the moment was pivotal. It was no longer just about buying a car, it was about dignity, fairness, and the courage to stand calm in the face of unjust judgment. As the staff watched quietly, a subtle change began to appear. Some whispered among themselves, realizing the manager might be wrong. Others simply observed, unsure of how to react. Marcus remained composed, silent, and polite, letting his presence speak louder than words. He knew the next few moments would determine how the day would unfold, but he was prepared. In that quiet, tense moment, Marcus's calm strength contrasted sharply with Greg's uncertainty. The story was set, the tension high, and the stage prepared for a revelation that would leave everyone in the room stunned. Marcus had entered as a simple customer, but what happened next would change everything, not only for Greg but for the staff and the dealership itself. The tension in the dealership grew thicker with every passing second. Greg, the manager, crossed his arms and stared at Marcus Williams, clearly struggling to understand why the man before him was not leaving. Marcus remained calm, his posture straight, his hands resting lightly on the briefcase he had placed on the desk. His eyes, steady and composed, met Greg's with a quiet confidence that made the manager shift uncomfortably in place. The few customers and staff in the showroom now watched closely, sensing that something unusual was happening. Greg's voice sharpened as he tried to regain control. "I'm telling you one last time, you need to leave now. This is my dealership, and I do not tolerate people who show up uninvited." His words were firm, but the authority he tried to project was beginning to falter under the weight of Marcus's calm presence. The manager had expected a meek response or a confrontation fueled by anger, but Marcus gave him neither. Instead, he stood silently, letting his quiet patience speak louder than words. "I understand your position," Marcus said gently, his voice steady and polite. "But I assure you, I am here with serious intentions. I am ready to make decisions today and follow the proper procedures. I am only asking for a conversation, nothing more." Greg's frown deepened. He was not used to being challenged in this way. Most people would have argued, raised their voice, or left quietly. Marcus's calmness frustrated him. He gestured sharply toward the door. "I don't care what your intentions are. You are causing confusion, and I don't want it. You must leave immediately." Marcus took a slow breath, letting the silence hang for a moment. His eyes briefly scanned the room, noticing the small reactions of the staff. A few were whispering quietly to each other, casting furtive glances toward the manager, while others simply watched, unsure of how to act. Marcus could feel the shift in energy, but he did not let it shake him. He had handled situations like this before, times when assumptions and prejudice had created obstacles that required patience, composure, and careful action. "Sir," Marcus said softly, "I am not here to create a scene. I respect your role and your responsibilities. I only wish to discuss a car purchase. I have prepared everything necessary to move forward. Can we find a way to do this professionally?" Greg's face tightened as he realized that Marcus was not intimidated by his authority. The manager had expected to see some fear, some uncertainty, but instead, Marcus's confidence was steady and quiet. This challenged Greg in a way he was not accustomed to. He took a deep breath, trying to regain control, and raised his voice slightly. "I said no. You are making things difficult, and I will not tolerate it. Security will escort you out if necessary." At that moment, the quiet hum of the showroom was pierced by a faint sound of shuffling feet. Greg had already pressed a button under the desk, calling for security. Marcus noticed the movement but stayed calm. He had been trained to remain composed in tense situations, and he knew that reacting with anger would only escalate the matter. He remained polite, letting the manager's behavior expose itself naturally. The staff looked uneasy. Some of them had seen the way Greg was treating Marcus and felt uncomfortable with the unfairness of it. One young sales assistant whispered to another, "I don't think he should be doing this. He hasn't done anything wrong." Another staff member glanced nervously at Greg, silently hoping the manager would rethink his approach. Marcus opened his briefcase slowly, reaching for the documents he had prepared. He carefully laid them on the desk, facing Greg. The papers included detailed information about the car he was interested in, as well as official documents confirming his serious intentions and identity. He spoke with quiet authority, "I hope these documents clarify my purpose here. I am ready to proceed seriously and professionally." Greg glanced at the folder briefly but did not take the time to read it thoroughly. He waved his hand dismissively, unwilling to acknowledge the possibility that he might be wrong. "I don't care about your papers," he said sharply. "You need to leave now." This is not a place for people who come in uninvited. Marcus remained composed. He did not argue or raise his voice. He simply looked at Greg and said, "I understand that you are trying to manage this dealership, but assumptions and quick judgments do not help anyone. I am here with respect and professionalism, and I ask for the same in return." The words hung in the air. The other staff members were beginning to notice the courage and calmness with which Marcus handled the situation. A few of them started whispering among themselves, acknowledging that the manager might be acting unfairly. Even some of the customers glanced toward Marcus with curiosity, sensing the tension but not fully understanding the reason behind it. Greg's irritation grew. He had expected resistance, but not this composed and calm behavior. His authority felt challenged, and he was unprepared for it. He gestured sharply toward the door again. "I don't care who you are. Security will remove you if you do not leave right now." At that moment, Marcus calmly lifted one of the documents from the folder, showing a carefully prepared contract. He did not raise his voice. He simply said, "I hope this clears up any confusion. I am Marcus Williams, and I am here to discuss serious business today. I am a qualified buyer and fully prepared for this discussion." The room fell quiet. Staff members exchanged glances, realizing that Marcus was presenting himself with dignity and professionalism. The customers who had been watching now leaned slightly forward, sensing that something unusual was unfolding. Marcus's calm presence contrasted sharply with the manager's aggressive tone. Greg's eyes narrowed as he tried to maintain control, but he began to feel the first seeds of doubt. He had assumed Marcus was just another visitor who did not belong, and now he was forced to question that assumption. He looked around at the staff and saw the subtle signs of agreement with Marcus's demeanor. Whispers and small gestures indicated that others were beginning to realize that the manager might be in the wrong. Marcus remained silent for a moment, letting the tension grow. He did not push or demand anything. Instead, he relied on patience, knowing that the truth would reveal itself without confrontation. His calm, confident presence made Greg fidget in his seat, and the manager's attempts at authority began to weaken. The first security personnel arrived, quietly stepping toward Marcus. They looked unsure, glancing at Greg for instructions. Marcus did not react with hostility, he simply nodded politely, acknowledging their presence. His calmness and professionalism created a silent tension that filled the room. The staff watched, some whispering, some simply observing, as the scene unfolded. Greg, feeling cornered, finally spoke louder, trying one last time to assert authority. "I said leave. Now. I don't want any problems." Marcus opened the folder fully and carefully laid out several documents on the desk. One of them included official paperwork showing that he was a serious investor ready to purchase vehicles and engage in business at the dealership. Another included personal identification confirming his full name and credentials. Marcus looked directly at Greg and said, "Sir, I hope you can see now that I am here with honesty and serious intent. I am not here to cause trouble. I am here to conduct business." For a moment, Greg paused. He looked at the documents, then back at Marcus. The tension in the room was almost tangible. Staff members whispered softly among themselves, unsure how to react but sensing that the manager might have overstepped. Marcus's calm demeanor contrasted with Greg's growing frustration and uncertainty, highlighting the manager's assumptions and bias. In that moment, it became clear that this encounter was no longer simply about buying a car. It was about respect, dignity, and the consequences of assumptions. Marcus remained composed, polite, and professional, silently demanding fairness. Greg, confronted with calm authority and undeniable presence, began to realize that he had misjudged the situation entirely. The story was set to reach a turning point. Marcus's calm strength and patience were about to challenge the manager's assumptions in a way that no words or arguments could fully prepare him for. The tension had grown, the staff had noticed, and the stage was prepared for a revelation that would leave everyone in the room stunned. The showroom had fallen into a deep silence, broken only by the faint sound of shoes against the polished floor as security stepped closer to Marcus. Everyone's eyes were fixed on the scene unfolding at the front desk. Greg, the manager, still had his arms crossed, his expression stern but slightly nervous. He thought he had control of the situation, but the atmosphere in the dealership told a different story. Marcus remained calm. He didn't move back when the two security men approached. Instead, he stood tall, his hands resting lightly on the documents he had placed on the desk. His steady presence made the guards pause. They looked from Marcus to Greg, waiting for clear instructions. Even they seemed uncertain, sensing that this man did not belong in handcuffs or being escorted out like a troublemaker. "Go ahead," Greg said quickly, trying to sound confident. "Escort him out." Marcus finally lifted one of the documents and handed it directly to the nearest security guard. His tone remained polite but carried an edge of authority now. "Before you make that decision, perhaps you should take a moment to look at this." The guard hesitated, then accepted the paper. His eyebrows furrowed as he scanned the heading. He looked back at Marcus, then at Greg, and then read more carefully. His hesitation was clear enough to draw attention. The second guard leaned closer to glance at the paper, and his expression changed almost instantly. The staff members began whispering more openly now. "What is it?" one asked. "Why do they look so surprised?" Another replied softly, "I don't know, but it looks serious." Greg noticed the shift and snatched the document out of the guard's hands. He looked down at it, expecting some kind of identification or a form of proof that Marcus was a customer. Instead, his face paled as his eyes caught the bold letters at the top of the page, "Ownership Transfer Agreement." His hands shook slightly as he skimmed through the document, his throat suddenly dry. The words were undeniable. The dealership had been sold just a few weeks earlier, and the new majority owner's name was printed clearly on the contract, Marcus Williams. Greg blinked hard, trying to process what he was seeing. He read the name again, then looked up at Marcus, whose calm gaze met his with quiet confidence. You're, Greg stuttered, unable to finish his sentence. "Yes," Marcus said softly, stepping forward and speaking clearly enough for everyone in the showroom to hear. "I am Marcus Williams, the new owner of this dealership. I finalized the purchase a few weeks ago. I came here today to see how things were running, quietly and without announcing myself. But instead of a professional welcome, I was asked to leave." A wave of shock swept across the room. Staff members froze in place, their jaws dropping in disbelief. Customers who had been browsing nearby cars now turned fully to watch. Even the security guards stepped back respectfully, realizing that the man they had been ordered to remove was not just any visitor, he was their boss. Greg's face flushed with embarrassment. His hands shook as he tried to hold the document steady. His voice cracked as he said, This must be a mistake." "I wasn't informed of any new owner," Marcus interrupted gently, his tone firm but calm. "The paperwork is in front of you. There is no mistake. I didn't announce myself because I wanted to see how the dealership was being run before making any changes. And now, I have seen enough." The silence that followed was heavy. Staff members exchanged nervous looks. Some of them felt a quiet relief, as if justice had finally arrived. Others simply stood still, shocked at the sudden shift in power. The manager who had spoken with such arrogance moments ago was now speechless, holding evidence of his mistake in trembling hands. Greg tried to recover his composure. He forced a weak smile and said, "Mr. Williams, I didn't realize. If I had known." Marcus's eyes stayed steady on him. "That is exactly the problem, Greg. You didn't need to know my name to treat me with respect. Every person who walks into this dealership deserves to be treated fairly. Whether they are a customer, a visitor, or the owner, respect should not depend on assumptions." The words hit harder than any raised voice could have. The staff lowered their eyes, realizing the truth of what Marcus had said. Greg opened his mouth to speak again but found no words. His pride and authority had crumbled in front of everyone, replaced by humiliation and regret. One of the younger staff members finally spoke, his voice soft but audible. I knew something was different about him. He carried himself like someone important. We should have listened. Marcus gave a small nod in acknowledgement but did not smile. He wanted the lesson to sink in, not to be brushed aside with apologies that meant little. He turned slightly, addressing not just Greg but everyone in the room. This dealership is under new leadership now. Things will change here. Respect, professionalism, and fairness will no longer be optional, they will be required. That is how we will build trust with our customers and with each other. The staff listened intently, some nodding slowly, others standing frozen in surprise. For them, this was more than a change in ownership, it was the beginning of a new standard. Greg, still clutching the papers, finally lowered his eyes. His arrogance had melted into shame. He tried to speak again, but his voice was low and uneven. I'm sorry, Mr. Williams. I didn't mean. Marcus raised his hand gently, stopping him. This is not about apologies, Greg. This is about reflection. Think about the way you approached me today. Think about the message it sends to customers, to staff, and to this business. That is not the image we want to carry forward. The silence that followed was filled with weight. Everyone knew the moment would be remembered, not just as the day the new owner revealed himself, but as the day the dealership's culture began to shift. Marcus closed his briefcase slowly, then looked around the room once more. His eyes were steady but calm. He had not raised his voice once, yet his presence commanded the entire room. Without saying another word, he turned toward the showroom floor, walking gracefully between the rows of shining cars. His quiet authority left a trail of respect in its wake. Greg stood frozen, the ownership papers still in his trembling hands. The staff remained silent, processing the revelation. The customers whispered softly, some with surprise, others with admiration for the man who had handled the situation with such composure. Marcus knew this was just the beginning. There would be more conversations, more changes, and more challenges ahead. But for now, the point had been made. Assumptions had been exposed, and respect had been demanded not through anger or force, but through truth and dignity. The revelation was complete. Marcus Williams, the man who had been told to leave, was in fact the owner. And nothing in the dealership would ever be the same again. The shock in the dealership had not yet faded. Greg still stood frozen at the front desk, the ownership documents trembling in his hands. His pride and authority were shattered, replaced by a heavy silence that filled the room. The staff remained motionless, unsure of what would happen next. Customers lingered nearby, whispering to each other in disbelief, realizing they had just witnessed something extraordinary. Marcus Williams, calm and collected, walked slowly back toward the group. His steps were steady, and his presence carried a quiet strength that everyone could feel. He stopped in front of Greg, his expression serious but not angry. The contrast between Greg's red, embarrassed face and Marcus's calm composure spoke volumes. Greg, Marcus said softly, his voice calm yet firm enough to echo across the showroom. When I came here today, I came as a customer. I came with respect, with patience, and with trust. But instead of being welcomed, I was judged, dismissed, and told to leave. The words hung heavy in the air. Staff members shifted uncomfortably, knowing the truth of what Marcus was saying. Greg opened his mouth to speak, but Marcus raised his hand slightly, silencing him without needing to shout. This is not about me being the owner, Marcus continued. This is about the way you treat people. Every single person who walks into this dealership deserves respect, whether they come in to buy a car, to look around, or simply to ask questions. Respect is not something you give only to those who look the way you expect. Respect must be given to everyone. The younger sales assistants nodded slowly, their eyes wide with admiration. They had never seen someone handle such a difficult situation with so much dignity and strength. Some of them even felt inspired, realizing that true leadership was not about raising your voice but about standing firm with integrity. Greg finally lowered his eyes, his shoulders slumping. He felt small in that moment, exposed in front of his staff and customers. He whispered, almost too quietly to hear, I was wrong. Marcus looked at him steadily. Yes, you were. But this is not only about an apology. Words mean little if actions do not follow. From today, things will change here. This dealership will no longer be a place of arrogance or judgment. It will be a place of professionalism, fairness, and dignity. That is the only way forward. The staff exchanged glances, some relieved, others nervous. Change was coming, and they all knew it. Marcus took a slow breath, then turned his attention to the employees around him. I want every member of this team to understand something clearly, he said, his voice carrying warmth but also determination. I am not here just to own a business. I am here to build a culture. I want each of you to treat every customer with respect, no matter who they are, no matter what they look like, no matter what you assume about them. That is how we succeed. That is how we build trust. The words touched the staff deeply. They nodded quietly, some even smiling faintly, sensing that Marcus's leadership would be different from what they had experienced before. Greg stood silently, his pride wounded but his conscience slowly awakening. He realized that his behavior had not only embarrassed him but had also set a poor example for his team. For the first time in years, he felt the weight of his actions pressing down on him. Marcus looked directly at him again. Greg, you are the manager of this dealership. That role comes with responsibility. Responsibility to guide your team, to set an example, and to uphold respect at every level. Today, you failed in that responsibility. You judged me without cause, and worse, you tried to use your authority to silence me. That cannot continue. Greg swallowed hard. His voice cracked as he finally spoke. Mr. Williams, I understand. I made a mistake. I let my assumptions guide me, and I disrespected you. I will do better. Marcus studied him carefully. He could see the shame in Greg's eyes, and he knew the man was struggling to accept the lesson. But Marcus was not interested in revenge or humiliation. He wanted growth. He wanted change. Then prove it, Marcus said simply. Change how you lead. Change how you treat people. Show me and everyone here that you are capable of learning from this mistake. Because in this dealership, under my leadership, there will be no room for arrogance. There will only be room for respect. The staff felt a wave of relief at those words. They realized Marcus was not there to punish or embarrass, but to build something better. His calm but firm leadership gave them hope that the dealership could truly transform. Customers who had been watching now smiled quietly, impressed by the dignity of the new owner. Some even clapped softly, breaking the heavy silence and bringing a ripple of warmth into the room. Marcus did not seek applause, but the gesture showed him that his message had reached beyond just the staff, it had touched everyone present. Greg lowered his head and nodded slowly. Yes, Mr. Williams. I will change. I will do better. Marcus gave a small nod in return, then turned his attention back to the staff. I will be meeting with each of you over the next few days. I want to hear your thoughts, your concerns, and your ideas. We will build this dealership together. But remember, respect will be the foundation. Without it, nothing else matters. The staff listened carefully, their faces showing a mixture of relief and respect. Some of them, who had long felt uneasy under Greg's management, finally saw a leader who valued fairness and dignity. Others, who had followed Greg's example without question, realized they would now have to adjust to a new standard. Marcus walked slowly through the showroom, his eyes passing over the shining cars and the staff who stood beside them. He stopped near a display car, placed his hand gently on the hood, and looked back at the group. These cars may shine, but it is people who give this place value. Customers trust us not because of the glass windows or the polished floors, but because of how we treat them. Remember that every day. The words sank in deeply. The staff nodded, and even Greg felt the weight of them pressing against his pride, reminding him of the work he needed to do. Marcus's calm authority had turned what began as humiliation into a powerful moment of reflection. The dealership was no longer the same place it had been that morning. A new chapter had begun, one built not on fear or arrogance but on respect, fairness, and dignity. As Marcus walked toward his office for the first time, staff members whispered softly to each other. Some spoke of how relieved they were, others of how shocked they still felt. But one thing was clear, everyone understood that the dealership had changed forever. The consequences were not about punishment. They were about transformation. Marcus had shown that true leadership was not in shouting or demanding power, but in standing calmly, firmly, and with dignity, even in the face of disrespect. And through that, he had planted the first seeds of a culture that would reshape the dealership for years to come. The dealership slowly returned to its usual rhythm, but something about the atmosphere was different now. The air felt charged with change, as if everyone in the room understood they had just witnessed a turning point. Marcus Williams walked calmly through the showroom, his polished shoes clicking softly against the shiny floor. He was not smiling, but there was a quiet sense of peace on his face. He had faced humiliation just an hour earlier, but now the truth had revealed itself, and dignity had won. As Marcus entered his new office for the first time, he paused at the doorway. The room was spacious, with large glass windows that overlooked the showroom floor. From here, he could see the staff moving quietly, some whispering to one another, some simply standing still as they absorbed everything that had happened. He could also see Greg at the front desk, his head lowered as he shuffled papers nervously. The man who once carried himself with arrogance now looked small and uneasy. Marcus sat at the desk, running his fingers lightly across the polished wood. He thought back to the morning, when he had arrived simply as a customer, hoping to blend in, hoping to see how the dealership really functioned. He had wanted honesty, not performance. And what he had seen had been both painful and eye-opening. In that moment of reflection, Marcus realized something important: he had been given an opportunity. The humiliation he had endured was not just a personal slight, it was a lesson, a mirror showing him the deep flaws in the culture of this place. And as the new owner, he had the power to change it. Later that afternoon, Marcus called the staff together for a meeting in the showroom. Chairs were arranged in a circle, not rows, because he wanted the atmosphere to feel open and equal. He stood in the center, hands folded in front of him, as every employee gathered quietly. Greg was among them, still uneasy, still carrying the weight of his mistake. "Thank you all for joining me," Marcus began, his voice calm and warm. "This morning was difficult for me, and perhaps for some of you who witnessed what happened. I came here quietly because I wanted to see this place through honest eyes. And I saw both strengths and weaknesses. Today was not just about me being judged. It was about all of us, and what we represent when we work here." The staff listened carefully, their eyes focused on him. Even those who had once followed Greg's harsh leadership without question now leaned forward, sensing something different in Marcus's words. "This dealership will not be built on fear or judgment," Marcus continued. "It will be built on respect. Respect for customers. Respect for each other. Respect for the work we do. That respect must be shown at every level, in every conversation, and in every action." The younger sales assistants nodded quickly, their faces showing relief. For years, they had worked under strict orders, sometimes treated harshly, and had watched customers walk away unhappy. Now, they felt a new possibility taking shape. Greg shifted uncomfortably in his chair, but Marcus did not single him out. Instead, he spoke to the entire group. "I am not here to tear people down. I am here to lift us up. But lifting up requires honesty. We must admit where we have failed, and we must commit to doing better. That is the only way forward." One of the senior sales staff raised his hand hesitantly. "Mr. Williams, does this mean we will have to change the way we approach customers?" Marcus smiled faintly, though his expression remained serious. "Yes. Change will not always be easy, but it will be necessary. Customers will no longer feel judged when they walk through these doors. They will feel welcomed. They will feel valued. Whether they buy a car or not, they will leave with respect." The staff murmured quietly among themselves, some nodding in agreement. Marcus allowed them a moment before he continued. "I will be meeting each of you individually in the coming days. I want to hear your voices. I want to understand your struggles and your ideas. Together, we will rebuild this place into something stronger, something better. But let me be clear, there will be no tolerance for arrogance or disrespect. Those days are over." The words were firm but encouraging. The staff felt hope, sensing that Marcus was not only a leader but also a listener. For the first time in years, they felt their opinions might matter. As the meeting ended, Marcus asked the staff to return to their duties. The energy in the showroom felt lighter now. Employees greeted customers with a little more warmth, their posture straighter, their voices kinder. Even the customers seemed to notice the difference. Greg lingered behind after the meeting, his face troubled. Finally, he approached Marcus quietly. "Mr. Williams," he said softly, I want to thank you for not firing me on the spot. I know I don't deserve your patience, but I will work to earn it. I don't want to be remembered for my mistakes. I want to change." Marcus looked at him steadily. His voice was calm but sincere. "Greg, you were wrong. There is no denying that. But what matters now is what you do next. If you are truly willing to change, then prove it not to me, but to your staff and to every customer who walks through those doors. That will be your redemption." Greg nodded slowly, his eyes filled with both shame and determination. He knew the road ahead would not be easy, but Marcus's words gave him a chance to become better than the man he had been. Days turned into weeks, and the dealership began to transform. Marcus kept his promise, meeting each employee one by one. He listened carefully to their ideas and concerns. Some spoke about unfair treatment they had witnessed. Others suggested ways to improve customer service. Marcus took notes, valuing every word. He showed them that leadership was not about commanding, it was about understanding. The staff responded positively. They began to treat customers with more warmth, more patience. They started helping each other instead of competing for praise. Slowly, the reputation of the dealership began to shift. Customers who once walked away dissatisfied now returned with smiles, praising the kindness of the staff. Even Greg changed. His arrogance softened into humility. He began greeting customers personally, listening to their needs instead of judging them. The staff noticed his efforts, and though it took time, they began to trust him again. He was no longer the same man who had dismissed Marcus on that first day. Marcus often watched quietly from his office, observing the changes with a sense of quiet pride. He did not boast or demand recognition. He simply continued guiding with calm strength, reminding everyone through his actions that dignity and respect were the true foundations of success. One evening, as Marcus locked his office and prepared to leave, he looked back at the dealership floor. The cars still shined under the bright lights, but it was not the cars that mattered most. It was the people, the staff who had grown, the customers who felt valued, and the culture that had begun to bloom under his leadership. He smiled faintly, knowing that the journey had not been easy, but it had been worth it. The lesson he had carried with him his whole life had been proven true once again: respect is more powerful than judgment, and dignity is stronger than arrogance. The story of that day, the day the manager tried to kick out the man who turned out to be the owner, spread quietly among employees and even among customers. People told the story not just as gossip but as a lesson. It became a reminder of how quickly assumptions can crumble, and how important it is to treat every person with fairness. For Marcus, it was never about revenge. It was about transformation. And as he walked out into the evening air, the dealership glowing behind him, he knew that the change had only just begun. The reflection was clear: dignity and patience can turn even the most humiliating moment into an opportunity for growth. And for Marcus Williams, that was the true victory.